In this video, we'll utilize the power of material instances to quickly set up different looks for our cubes with a minimal amount of work required. We'll convert some of the variables that we have in a material to parameters, and then we will play around with those parameters in the material instances. If you are familiar with material instances, then you are free to move along, click on the next video. But this is a really cool and important part of working with materials. So if you are not familiar yet, then I definitely recommend that you check this out. Let's get started. As a game designer, you're probably familiar with the concept of hierarchy, where you set up your base actor, and then as a child of that actor, you can now set up specific settings and play with the variables of the parent class. A similar process can be applied to materials. We have a material, the one that we created in the last lesson. That's this one, for example. But we can also create a child class of that, and that's called a material instance when working with materials. So on any of the materials, also material instances, I can right mouse button and say create a material instance. I'm going to call this ME red and green because I want to play around with the colors. Now, if I open this up, then it's a simplified version of the material editor that we normally have when making a material. And this is very similar to the first time you open up a child actor of a blueprint class. Now, we do see a bunch of settings here, but nothing very specific to our material. These are only the generic settings that you get when creating a material instance. Comparing this to blueprints, if you want to be able to tweak a variable in a material instance, or in a child in this case, we need to make sure that the variable that we want to tweak is editable. It's actually a parameter, is a variable that we can work with. If I go to the material that we made, then we have two colors and a texture. Basically, I want all of these to be editable. That sort of changes the name and that changes the node a little bit. If I take this top one, for example, I can say right mouse button and convert to a parameter. This makes it into an editable variable, basically. So I'm going to do that, convert it to a parameter, and now I can assign a name. In this case, I will go with color 1, because this is the base color. I could also call this color base. Let's do that, better naming convention. And for the blue one, we'll call this the color of the mask, right? We have this masking texture is here, and we can do the exact same process here, only it's a little bit lower further down the list. It's called convert to parameter. We will do now, and we'll call this texture mask. Now we did see some changes here. Our color factor suddenly went from a 3 factor to a 4 factor. We now have the opacity channel here. So if I add a factor 2, for example, and I convert that to a parameter, it also turns into a factor 4. Converting it to a parameter basically makes it a factor 4. Now in our case, it doesn't really change much. We already had a color. The opacity is going to stay 1. So the color output is going to be exactly the same, and we don't really have to make any further changes. Now if I press apply and save, I can go back to our material instance, and suddenly we have the variables exposed to us here in the parameter group section. Currently this is called global texture parameter values and global vector parameter values. If we wanted to, we can give those their own names. We can make sure that this is all in the right categories. And they are called groups. So let's call this group mask. We can actually add this to the same group, mask, and we'll call this base color. Base settings might have been better. Now when we go back to the material instance, we can see base color and mask, and these two are together, and this one is alone. So now previewing it on a plane, similar to how I would do that in a material, I can now completely change up the color very quickly and say, what did we call this? Red, and the other color will go with green. And if we wanted to, we could select a different texture for the logo as well, but I'm going to keep that on the UE4 logo for now because of nostalgia. The nice thing is that we can duplicate this and duplicate it again. And let's go with purple, yellow, and blue and orange. So I can now open these up, blue and orange. So that means we can go blue. And we're going to go a bit of orange, and then the purple, yellow. Exact same process. Let's make this purple, and let's make this yellow. And now I can apply these to the different cubes, and we have very distinct looking cubes here. And I can shoot it, and they all have their own style. Now, the nice thing is that similar to with blueprint actors, if I want to make a change to the base, they are shared with all of the children. I didn't really think about opacity, specularity, and roughness. I just have some values there. What if we wanted to actually have some values for that? So we're going to say roughness of 0, and we're going to use this as specular, and that sort of changes the look of this logo a bit, which I then have to save. It is a little bit hard to see, but we can now in the logo see the changes and see the specularity and roughness changes. Basically, the nice thing is you only have to do that once, right? If I wanted to add emissiveness, for example, so because it's now suddenly, instead of just being a flat color, it's actually sending out light. We can see that really nicely in the reflection there. That just works for all of the children. And this is really why you should be using material instances, because if you just, especially as a game designer, just set up something quickly and you want an artist to pick this up later and work with, if they're going to start experimenting with the different settings and the visuals, then you want there to be a sort of a logical setup for that, and that they're able to pick that up and work with that information. And we just saved ourselves a lot of time by being able to very quickly change the colors. And now suddenly later we're thinking, maybe we want them to be emissive. Bam, all of the different cubes, all of the different styles are now emissive. So material instances, super powerful, really useful.